Hello, I'm Joe Ruggiero, and welcome to my podcast, Inspired, and the people that inspire me. Well, you're in for a real treat today, and here I am at the Calabasas Country Club, and I'm looking out at the old stables that actually were I want to save this for my guest, Marc Wanamaker. Marc is the quintessential expert on these old ranches that were built in the 1920s or late 30s, I guess. But just to give you a little bit of history of Marc, Marc has written several books. The History of Hollywood with Marc Wanamaker, Three Stooges Locations, The History of Hollywood with Marc Wanamaker, the original female action stars of film, the world's first female filmmaker, Alice Guy Blanche, and it goes on and on. I really am thrilled to have you here, Marc, because there's so many questions that we have for what was the original Warner Ranch and the home of Harry Warner. So, welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And where shall we begin? I mean, this is your first visit to the
This
country
is my
club.
first visit here to this beautiful country club. Wow. Because I'm a historian of the country clubs of Los Angeles, and this is one I have never been to.
Well, that's interesting.
And because all these country clubs have to do with the history of Los Angeles, and I'm a Los Angeles historian first, then a film historian second, and basically born and raised in Hollywood, grew up here. And my parents came from Chicago, but the funny thing is my father was very interested in the history of the West.
That is interesting. And many of his patients, because he was a doctor,
Yes.
were cowboys or stunt people.
And actors. Other actors. Hans Hall was one of his.
Is that right?
Remember, he was with the Bowery Boys.
Right, I remember very well.
Bowery Boys.
But before we get into
Yes.
all the history of this country club, I want to ask you a little bit
Yes.
about Gene Autry.
Yeah.
Because you knew Gene.
Oh, yes.
And he's a legend. He really is.
I knew Roy Rogers, too. I knew them all. And all of it came through Ray Crash Corrigan. They called him Crash because when he was at Republic, he was known to have crashed tanks and other weird-looking objects into walls to knock them down because he was a superhero there. And they called him Crash Corrigan, okay?
Well, now your expertise with the Westerns, and of course the thing that interests me the most, and the reason why you're here today, is the history of Warner Ranch. Now, this was the site, the clubhouse that we're sitting in right now of Calabasas Country Club, was the original residence of Harry Warner.
Yeah, well, his ranch residence. He lived in Beverly Hills,
Oh,
like
yes,
they
yeah,
all
gorgeous
did.
home.
No, but this ranch is coupled with the preface to all of this, is that when the studios came here in 1909 with the Bison Film Company and the Selig Polyscope Company from Chicago, they settled in downtown L.A. and then North Los Angeles in Edendale, which is still there. It's sort of Echo Park, Silver Lake area. That's where all the studios were first.
Oh, really?
And then eventually they started to spread out into Hollywood. The first studio in Hollywood was the Nestor Film Company of 1911 at Gower and Sunset. And then right across the street, other little tiny Poverty Row studios set up shop. And Beechwood Drive, Gower Street, and Sunset, which is the heart of the beginnings of Hollywood. And these ranches didn't come till later.
Now, Hollywood really was born in Fort Lee, New Jersey, right?
Yes, Fort Lee, New Jersey, and I'm involved with that. We just opened a brand new museum in Fort Lee, New Jersey, to document the history of the filmmaking in New Jersey, which then came out here.
And they came out here because?
They came out here for several reasons. Some of the independents were being pursued by Thomas Edison at the time, who claimed all the patents of the cameras and film, and Eastman with the film stock. So they went around them and went to Pathé Company in France and got the cameras and film stock there. But Edison was very angry at this and sent patent forces out to get them. In other words, agents and detectives, and they even shot at the cameras with rifles to blow them up and shoot them down so they couldn't use the camera. So many of them decided to come out west away from Edison, but Edison had people out here. They followed them here. But the main reason they all came out here was for the weather,
Right.
cheap land, and cheap labor.
Right.
That's why they were here. And also, most everyone in 1909, 1910, 11, and 12, this period of time, everybody was doing Westerns.
Right.
The public wanted Westerns. I mean, you have to understand that the Indian Wars of the 1870s and into the up to Wounded Knee of 1890s was only a few years before these films were depicting these battles. Right. So Buffalo Bill actually had his own film unit, and he was making films about these real days. So my specialty is real history and film history and how it intertwines.
Well, now let's go to this particular site. This was considered the wilderness.
Yes.
In the 30s or 20s, late 20s,
20s.
I guess. And what was filmed here? You have so much information about Errol Flynn and Elizabeth Taylor and all of the things that were filmed here. You even showed me a picture of the Dawn Patrol,
yes,
which was probably one of the most incredible ventures into aviation photography.
That's right. Well, look, I mean, this ranch is a part of many other ranches out here. There were many private ranches, and then finally the studios purchased their own. Paramount Ranch, 20th Century Fox Ranch is Malibu Canyon, Calabasas area, the Warner Ranch here in Calabasas. Then there was, of course, a whole bunch of other ones. Universal had their own ranch, so they didn't have to go far.
And was that where Universal?
Yeah, that's where Universal is, yes.
Yes.
But you see, these ranches were used because the city was encroaching upon those studios, which were in Hollywood, like Paramount, for example. They didn't have... So what they used before they had their ranches, before Warner had this ranch, before Paramount got their ranch, etc., was the Providencia Rancho. The Providencia Rancho later became known as the Lasky Ranch, and that today is Forest Lawn,
right.
Hollywood Hills.
That's right.
That was the backlot for everybody, for the Bison Film Company, Nestor Film Company. They were all making Westerns, making them there, which before Warner Brothers was across the river there. Little by little, as time went on, the city's growing, LA is growing, they needed remote ranches, and that's how this ranch became. But this became a ranch because of Harry Warner. Harry wanted to retire, and he decided to raise racehorses. He wasn't the only one doing this. There were many moguls who raised, Louis B. Mayer had his ranch raising thoroughbreds for horse racing. So he came out here. First of all, Harry started to buy land here. He was like the real estate guy of the brothers, Jack and Abe and Harry, and Jack, Abe, and Harry were the three major ones
right.
that survived. Sam died early on before the advent of sound. So they came out here to have these horse ranches. Nothing was here. This was 1928. Now let me explain something. 1928 is when Warner Brothers purchased the first national studios in Burbank, which is now where Warner's is today.
Right.
Warner's studio was on Hollywood, on Sunset and Van Ness and Bronson Avenue. Today it's the KTLA studio. That was Warner Brothers. Then in 28, they moved out to the Valley. And at the same time, they thought they would buy real estate for ranches to film on, remote ranches. So Harry bought this property out here. He bought 500 acres, 800 acres, 1,200 acres, buying them from the different ranch people out here,
right.
which created this giant, 2,500, something like that, acre ranch.
Well, the thing that amazes me, and you brought a wonderful documentation of this particular property, is it's nestled in such a beautiful valley, surrounded by wonderful, I don't know what you would call them, hills. I would call them mountains.
No, they're hills.
Because I'm from the East Coast.
Well, this is the Santa Monica Mountains,
Yeah.
but they are hills up to the mountains.
And they would actually build villages. As a matter of fact, Paul Muni shot Juarez here. And that is so beautiful in terms of the architecture. And we had talked about the art directors that you had worked with. What talent to document that period of time.
Okay, well, this is where I come in, because I come in to research. I worked in all the research libraries at the studios in the 80s and 90s. I met all the art directors. I knew them all. And what is the research library's function? The function is, for example, to build a village for Juarez. a Mexican village, which was actually the art director who did that, which I can't remember his name right now, but he was inspired by the San Juan Capistrano mission, and that's what that was the inspiration for that set. So now about the ranch itself, about the hills you mentioned. They looked for particular places where they could have these ranches isolated by hills and everything. So they didn't want noise. They didn't want anybody looking in on them. Plus, Plus, they needed north light because the light is coming from east to west. So all the sets were built south. So when the sun was coming, there was always light.
Wow.
North light, in other words, on these sets.
Interesting.
So they had these hills here, isolated. Paramount Ranch is the same. Fox Ranch is the same in Malibu Canyon. These were isolated places on purpose so they wouldn't be bothered, and they can have different looks wherever they needed. Germany, Russia, Spain, whatever you want is on these ranches.
Well, now, you had mentioned in terms of the films that many of our listeners would know were filmed here, but just snippets or parts. Now,
That's
Calamity Jane.
That's right.
That was filmed.
Now, this is the point, is that people don't realize that very rarely do they shoot one whole film at the ranch.
Right.
Sometimes they did, though, but a lot of the times, no. A lot of it was done in pieces. They would build that Juarez set, for example, but then on the back lot of Warner Brothers, they had another a Mexican village set there. They would intercut them. You would never know. Left-Handed Gun with Paul Newman, for example, shot here. They shot on the western town there and the western town here.
Right.
Now, for San Antonio and Dodge City and all those Errol Flynn films that were shot here, they had first of all, early on, they built a small western town. And they used the smaller western town for different films. But then they built the giant San Antonio town. We're talking a seriously large western town where Dodge City was filmed, etc. And they built that nearby, nestled in the hills there, so nobody would see or hear them. So you understand, then other studios would use them also.
They were only two-sided, too, right?
Most of them were only facades. Mm-hmm. But this is where it gets complicated. This is where it takes years of research, is that other studios would use each other's ranches. And it gets confusing now that, like for example, National Velvet. Let's use that one because they love that one here.
And the ranch or the stables are still here.
The stable area. But most of the riding scenes and everything were done at the Clarence Brown Ranch, which is now which was the Gillette Ranch at the time in Calabasas, which is not far away. It's right across the street from the Fox Ranch. That's where National Velvet. So National Velvet shot in different places. Also, National Velvet was shot in the back lot of MGM Studio in Culver City. So when you intercut this all together, wow, you get the feeling. But as a historian, I have to sort out, where did they shoot this? Where did they shoot that?
Exactly. Well, also, parts of Giant were filmed here. Was that in the Virginia when they first meet?
Well, this is it, yes. Giant basically was shot in Texas.
Right.
The main house was shot in Texas. That's the famous scene showing James Dean in this car. He's leaning in the car, and this house is sitting there in the middle of the nowhere of the plains of Texas.
Right. That was Marfa, right?
Yes.
Marfa, Texas.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then again, they would use the ranch like this because this is a Warner ranch, so it was easy to use their own ranch. They didn't have to rent Universal or anywhere else. So yes, we have pieces of that film here as well.
Now, what about Robin Hood? Because Errol Flynn was very popular in those
See, this
days.
is where the research, I have problems with this. I have documented where everything was shot on The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. It was shot in Chico, California for scenes up there. Shot over here at the Sherwood Forest here near Westlake Village.
Oh, right.
It was shot on the back lot of Warner Brothers. Now, it's very possible they used something here, but I can't find that yet.
Well, this will be good for your research and your detectiveness.
Yeah, tell me about it. So it's a constant thing. But look, so later on when country clubs took over some of these places, the history of country clubs is awesome.
Right.
Los Angeles, Southern California. I have a list of country clubs in the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century. There were at least 30 here.
What was the oldest?
Oh God, I'd have to research that. I don't remember.
No, I was just curious.
Some are not here anymore. There's Country Club Drive, which is in Hancock Park area off of Van Ness. There's a giant mansion there to this day. I forgot the name of the people. It's still there, but there was a giant country club there, all the way down to Adams Boulevard.
Wow.
In that part of town. That's why many of the famous estates on Adams Boulevard, many of the famous people who built their estates there on Adams Boulevard. Doheny is at the end of it. The Doheny mansion is
Right.
which is now part of the next to USC, and that the St. Mary's University. I can't remember St. Martin's. I can't remember the name of it.
Loyola?
No. It's downtown. So Adams Boulevard starts with the Doheny Mansion and goes all the way west with one mansion after another. The Clark Mansion is there. That's the Clark Library, which USC has. So my point is there were country clubs all around surrounding downtown LA in the 19th century. In Pasadena, of course, the oldest area, those were the oldest country clubs there.
Exactly.
But then they were everywhere. We're talking the teens, 20s, and 30s. Now, I looked up the country clubs now, recently, in the Southern California. There's got to be 60.
Yeah.
And I went to a wedding. I forgot where I went out there, and there's a big country club there. Everybody has a country club. Every town has a country club. Vernon was a major country. That's one of the oldest ones. The Vernon Country Club out there in Vernon.
Well, see, originally, when this was turned from the Warner Ranch to the golf course,
Yes.
they wanted to develop this as
Yes.
housing. And I guess they weren't able to. Well, it's all around.
That was later.
But it's not on this property.
No, that was later. This whole development of this area was much later. I looked it all up. I knew who did it, who designed it. They designed it trying to do a Spanish looking, and all this kind of thing. It's on my timeline, but I just don't remember everything. I remember a lot, but not everything.
Well, when Harry Warner decided that he was going to allow filming,
Yes.
he and his wife, I don't know if they had children, but they were living here as a retreat.
Yes, as a retreat.
Right.
Exactly.
And then he
Yes.
said, hey, why don't you guys come over here and do some filming? Is that
They
what-
also had he had a small hole golf course as well. They all did.
Oh.
Everybody did. They all had their own little golf course. Horseback riding, of course. He was raising thoroughbreds, but everybody had a stable with their riding horses, the horseback ride.
Right. Well-
Everybody did. This is the whole culture of the San Fernando Valley is horseback riding.
Did the Warner brothers come from the East Coast?
Yeah, well, yes, of course. Everybody came from New York. And many of these were the Jewish moguls that came from everywhere, from Poland, from Hungary, from Germany. Carl Laemmle's from Laupheim, Germany. Louis B. Mayer's from Kiev, Russia.
Wow.
I mean, the Warner brothers were Russian, if I remember correctly, or Polish, excuse me. So they all came to New York. They all got into the, quote, schmata business, which is in Yiddish for clothing business.
Clothing.
And little by little, Samuel Goldfish, he was, his name was Goldfish at first. He was a glove salesman. I know the Warners were into the clothing, and they all were.
Were any of the French, because the motion pictures really, they were born in France, right?
Yes. Well, very good question. Because early on, we're talking in the Edison Vitagraph, Biograph in the late 19th century in America. But after the turn into the 20th century, Pathé was here, Gaumont was here, Eclair was here, and several other major companies already here. Now get this, are you sitting down? Good, I
Yes.
hope you are. Because the Méliès company of the Méliès brothers, they're the ones that created Trip to the Moon and all the wonderful magic in films in the late 19th, early 20th century. Well, Georges Méliès, the brother, set up a Western company, and they set it up in San Antonio, Texas in 1910. And Francis Ford was the lead director general, making Westerns. They were American Westerns, French company distributing. And that's John Ford's brother, Francis Ford. So
That's interesting.
we have this company, Méliès, making Westerns in the United States, in Texas, in 1910.
Oh, so they did.
Oh, gosh,
Yes.
they were here.
Yeah.
And then Fort Lee had all kinds of French ones. Bayonne, New Jersey had tons of companies there. and French companies. But the French history of Los Angeles is great because Paul de Longpre, he was one of the most important 19th century French painters, came here in the late 19th century, built a giant mansion on Hollywood Boulevard at Wilcox, and that was the first tours for tourism coming to Hollywood, was to go and see him and get a painting, eat lunch in his gardens.
Interesting.
So,
now tell me a little bit about Old Town Calabasas.
Sure.
Because that was a stop on the Pony Express?
No, the Stagecoach.
Oh, Stagecoach, right.
Stagecoach.
So that goes back to when? I mean,
Pony Express went pretty much north of Los Angeles to Sacramento, and that's where that was. But the Butterfield Stagecoach came from Santa Fe and came south and right up to Los Angeles and right up to San Francisco.
And what about the Reyes Adobe, which still stands to this
Well,
day?
we're now talking back to the days of the ranchos and the missions. And I just gave a speech last night for the 177th anniversary of Campo de Cahuenga and the signing of the Treaty of Cahuenga, which was the first treaty signed for Alta California to end the war with Mexico.
Wow.
Which led to the creation of the state of California.
Right.
So that was a stage stop. That's right at the base of Cahuenga Pass, across from the gate of Universal City. And that Butterfield stage went right through the valley, down Ventura Boulevard, stopping at, of course, the old rancho properties. Now, in 1834, the missions gave... Spain gave up, and Mexico gave up on the missions. They took their lands from them.
That was El Camino Real.
Yes.
No.
They gave the lands to the Rancho people, and that became the Mexican period of California. And those ranchos are these ranchos, the Reyes Rancho, in
Encino?
Encinos, Los Encinos Rancho.
Which was settled by the French.
Yes, that's right. There were many Europeans that came out and settled on these rancho properties. They were allowed to buy now ranchos. Before, they could never buy them. Mm-hmm. But they had to marry. Some of them had to marry into California families, things like the Workman Temple Rancho in East L.A. Then there is, of course, Dominguez Hills Rancho. We still have reenactments there of what's going on. But get this, between 1834 and 1850s, only 16 years, all of this turmoil was going on to create the state of California. So many of the ranchos are still there. We still have the adobes.
Right.
They're still there. I mean, and the missions. Luckily, we have the missions. Let me bring up one important point about the film industry and the missions. When the Selig Polyscope Company came from Chicago in 1908, they set up the first permanently built studio in Edendale, north of L.A., and there was a guy named Charles Lummis. Charles Lummis was a historian of the ranchos. He helped set up the Southwest Museum. He was very important. So he made a deal with the Selig Company to buy a permit to shoot on mission property, and the money would go to the restoration of the missions. So early on, the film industry had to do with the culture and history of California, and it was on the minds of the Warner Brothers and everyone else that they were buying a property on real mission property, and they got into the culture of horseback riding and the missions, and they put them all in their films.
Well, the architecture, I mean, I can remember visiting San Luis or San Juan Capistrano. I can remember going to the Santa Barbara mission.
Yes.
The architecture is so spectacular.
Yes.
But many of the studios duplicated that.
Well, get this. Colonel Selig with Lummis, when they built that first studio, they designed it as a San Gabriel mission.
Wow.
So when you see pictures of it in my early book, I'll have to plug, called Hollywood, Early Poverty Row Studios of Los Angeles, it shows the development of these early studios and how they not only developed them as a studio, which is a factory, they actually designed the building as the San Gabriel mission because they started shooting at the missions.
Well, the one thing that I think is so wonderful, and this goes back, maybe you can tell me till when, but I can remember my sister was an educator in the 1950s here in California, and part of grammar school curriculum was to duplicate and create these miniature missions that they would report on. I don't even know if they still do that.
I made one.
Exactly. And I think that is such an incredible thing to teach children
the history of this wonderful,
They used to know the
wonderful
history.
state.
They were taught the history, and including the indigenous peoples here. They knew the, of the different tribes that were here. The Shumash, and there's a whole bunch of them right here. Beverly Hills has their own tribe, and Hollywood has their tribe. The point is that you have to teach the roots. If you're born here or live here, you have to know what happened here.
And
they stopped doing that.
These were little villages, really. They were self-sustaining.
Yes. Now, Los Angeles was a slow-growth community. Now, remember, we have the Pueblo of Los Angeles and the plaza downtown near the river. But all these little communities out here, all these towns, the Culver City and whatever, all came later. Because it was all agricultural. The valley, all the basin, was all agricultural. The railroads didn't even come in until the late 19th century. I mean, this was a slow-growth town. So slowly but surely, the Los Angeles started to grow around these communities. Now, Universal City is really North Hollywood. But the point is, there was nothing in North Hollywood. It was really a agricultural community. But when the movie industry came in, created Universal City, quotes, it became known around the world, and little by little, they needed services. They needed a little town. They needed economy, stores, businesses, light industry, medical, everything being encroaching on the city, and then eventually the city, that's why it's so big. Dominguez Hills is like 1 million miles away, but that was part of the rancho areas of Southern California, and now Los Angeles is 200 square miles.
Wow.
People don't realize that it's that big.
Sprawl.
The valley is big. People don't realize how big the valley is. I took my cousin, he's not from here, and we were driving from Chatsworth into Hollywood. He says, when are we going to get to Hollywood? I'm on the freeway yet. It's taking forever to get there. It's so big.
So, Mark, I want to ask you this question. We've talked about the old days and all the wonderful historic films that have been filmed here at the Calabasas Country Club. But how about after it became a golf course? Was anything filmed here then?
Yes, they did come back and film here like they did at all the country clubs. Now, this goes to the question, why did they do this? How did they do this? How did they know about it? Basically, as far back as 1915, the studios, when they were here, including East Coast, they had location departments. I worked in the research libraries at all the studios, and they had dumped their research library location photos in our library. So I discovered them. And I went, oh my gosh, look at this. I have the Chatsworth train station shot in 1929, exteriors, interiors, everything on it. My gosh, that was used for research, for the set designers, of course, to design a set, like a railway station in the 1880s. So during the 80s, the studios decided to get rid of their libraries. Don't ask me why. They became corporate, and they decided they didn't need them. Of course they needed them. You need it for everything, for writers, for art directors, for just about everybody needs research. Even the executives needed to know what happened at Paramount in the 60s, who took over whatever. This is what we provided. So research libraries had these location department photos. So, for example, there was extensive location photos of country clubs. I have a lot of that today, and I forgot to look to see if I had this, but I have historic shots of these old ones. You asked me how old are these country clubs. I have them back to the 1912, 13, 14 in Southern California.
Well, many of the moguls and many of the stars were golfers, and, of course,
that's right.
The celebrity tournaments that we have
Absolutely.
even to this day.
So it's not uncommon that they looked in the research library. Oh, look, we have we already have Calabasas Country Club. That is a Warner Ranch. Bang, they come back here and shoot.
Now you're working with the Academy Award.
I work with
museum.
I work with the Academy officially, the Academy Library.
Uh-huh.
It's the Margaret Herrick Library in Hollywood, and we have in our library there maybe about 18 million photos on the history of the film industry. We have extensive clipping files on everything that went on, from call sheets to history to publicity to whatever you want. So it's one of the most important research libraries in the history of the film industry in the world.
Let me ask you this question. Is there a course in college or university that you can take on Hollywood history? Does it exist?
Well, you know what? Most of these universities teach filmmaking, They do have appreciation classes. Yes, there are. But mostly they talk about the films themselves. I seem to be one of the only ones. I had a class I did at UCLA for 6-7 years in the extension on the history of the beginnings of the studios, technology, where they came from, who they were, all the nuts and bolts that people really want to know.
Right.
But there's not a lot of that around nowadays.
Isn't that interesting? Because now I, being one of the first graduates of the Annenberg School of Communications at the University of Pennsylvania, I really delighted in the way that curriculum was built. I mean, it was really catch as catch can, because they weren't really sure where they wanted to go. And I can remember a friend of mine coming into my college dorm and saying, "You want to get a master's degree?" I said, "Well, my dad said he would pay for it. What is it?" And he said, "Well, your thesis would be to produce a 1/2-hour television show at the Annenberg School." I said, "Oh, I can do that." And that's how I got my master's degree. But I find Hollywood history so fascinating, and you're the go-to guy. I mean, do you realize that?
The reason is that, as I mentioned earlier, I was a kid actor. I was on all these back lots. My uncle was Sam Wanamaker, the director, producer, and he used to come back from England because he started the Globe Theatre in London. I worked 15 years on that myself.
Wow.
But he used to come here in the 50s and 60s and shoot pilots for different TV shows. Like Custer of the West was one of these shows. I was there as an extra.
Wasn't it filmed here?
It was filmed.
Custer?
They filmed in different parts,
Yeah.
like everywhere. I don't remember all the locations, but I used to visit him on the back lot of MGM, back lot of Paramount, back lot everywhere. He did the Lancer TV Western show, in which Tarantino profiled in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Right, which I love.
And I was actually a technical advisor on that, too. But the point is that I had my background in the history of old California. I was in Zorro, for example. So I knew as a kid what's going on and how they're using the old history of California in these films and TV shows. So when I became a film historian, because of the research libraries, wow, I mean, it's my history as well.
Absolutely.
That's why they say, "Oh my gosh, your lecture's so wonderful, you're so enthusiastic." Yeah, because it's me.
Right. Well, this goes back to the old adage, if you got to love what you're going to do. So in closing, as you know, my podcast is called Inspired. What inspires you? What inspired you? I guess as a kid, you were right in the middle of it.
No, I've been inspired since I was 7 years old. I mean, because I met these people who I started to know that these were important people. Walt Disney? So I knew at an early age, this man's important. So I'm inspired immediately by their interest in not only the film industry, but all their activities in Southern California, where the studio shot films and the technology and everything. I was inspired early on.
Well, Marc, I just can't thank you enough. And believe me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to have you back. I want to be sure that you see the original stables that little Elizabeth Taylor filmed National Velvet in. And we really want you to come back and visit us more often. This has been so much fun. Thank you for sharing.
That's why I'm glad you're doing this, because part of what I do, I try to do everything. I have my own short podcast readings. I do many books. I appear everywhere on TV and videos, everything. I'm with Hollywood Heritage. We run the Hollywood Heritage Museum. I'm one of the founders of Hollywood Heritage. And we have the old Lasky DeMille Barn, which is an old horse barn in Hollywood, and which became the first feature length film made out of that studio, The Squaw Man, in 1913. Wow. So you see what I mean? I'm immersed in this. I want younger people and everyone to learn about this. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for the inspiration, and come back and see us. Thank you.